At its peak, the Roman Empire nearly accounted for 21% of humanity at the time. The Roman civilization lasted for about 1,000 years, so you can only imagine the massive impact they've had on the world, and in the world of finance. Despite the size of the Roman Empire, they were actually highly sophisticated. They had an urbanized society, well developed markets, and financial institutions. And this resulted in some people becoming very, very rich. So, given that the Roman Empire had such a unique economy and a complex market, I wanted to explore this topic. How did money and finance work in the Roman Empire? Okay, so let's start with daily, ordinary life. How did people buy or sell things every day? So, if you think about your house or your money in your bank account today, it's tied to you as an individual. But you see, this wasn't the case back then. Back then, the rights to property and to money were tied to the entire household, not to the individual. So this ended up meaning that most of the time the patriarch of the family or the father of the family managed the entire family's pooled fortune. It didn't matter what the others would earn in the same household, it was all considered one household's money. So that's how money were tracked on individual family levels. And then for daily transactions, actually coins were used. However, if a household ever ran out of coins, it didn't really mean that they became broke, because you see, back then there was this concept of virtual money. Think of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies used today. A transaction made with them is stored in a digital public ledger which confirms that an action has happened. And this is very surprising, but the Romans actually had something very similar. A person would buy or sell something, and the record of this transaction would be recorded into a public ledger, and no physical money would change hands. And later on, the records could be referred to if someone wanted to exchange this virtual currency for real coins or even to trade an item later on. Now, of course, they didn't have the advanced technology that we have today to record information, so the system was entirely based on trust. And this actually ended up working quite well in Roman society. You see, reputation and social standing was guarded fiercely back then, and so a system of trust like this actually makes a lot of sense. The term that they used was called dignitas. To them, losing one's dignitas was a fate literally worse than death. So anyway, that was a little bit about everyday life and how finances worked back then. But what about the banking system? By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please consider following the channel. Over 97% of you watching the channel aren't really subscribed right now, so please do subscribe, it really helps me out. Alright, on to the Roman banking system. So given the lack of technology, mistakes would be made a lot, and some obligations would be forgotten, especially when it comes to managing large and complex financial operations. But for such cases, lenders and borrowers adopted a physical contract called a chirographum. So what this meant was that one contract was displayed outside for everyone to see, and another copy was sealed inside two waxed tablets in front of witnesses. This ensured that the document was both easy to verify and secure from being tampered. So measures such as this really allowed for early forms of banking to emerge. But these were not for the average Joe. Instead, they were mostly used by larger institutions and very wealthy individuals. Examples would include temples, merchants, and guilds. And these businesses and massive institutions actually ended up facilitating trade and the expansion of networks within the empire. And the banking system back then enabled this expansion to happen, because there was trust and credibility in the system for allowing this development to occur. So similar to this, there was also a system for investment opportunities using loans. You see, wealthy people no longer needed an entourage of armed troops to guard their money in wagons as they traveled to invest in far-off opportunities. Rather, they could travel light and make purchases using loans from a local creditor, only to be repaid later on upon agreed-upon terms. Similar to this, another interesting form of banking was the concept of deferred payments. The seller would agree to hand over land or another asset to the buyer without taking in any money. The buyer would later on pay the owed money using profits generated from the asset into which they originally invested. You're probably wondering, how did they all trust each other to make these complex financial transactions so secure? And that takes us back to the concept of dignitas that we mentioned earlier. If a buyer did that and the news went public, he effectively was now a pariah in the Roman society. He would effectively be cancelled from the Roman financial system. Okay, so far we discussed personal finances, daily spending, and different forms of the banking system in the Roman Empire. But what about public government financing? How did the Roman Empire manage their own empire's finances? So let's look into that next. An empire as large as Rome would need an equally large revenue source to function. Financial management of the Roman Empire itself was one of those things that went through multiple reforms over the empire's lifespan, which was about 1,000 years, so it went through a lot. And it might be surprising to hear, but a shift from the Republic to the empire itself actually helped improve Rome's finances and the state's investments in public welfare. So just for context, the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire in around 27 BCE, when Julius Caesar's adopted son, best known as Augustus, became the ruler of Rome. So that's the beginning of the Roman Empire. So before that took place, originally in the time of the Roman Republic, the Senate, which was composed of Rome's most powerful men, actually controlled its public finances. However, they were extravagant and careless with their public revenue, and this led to indifference and plundering of public property. However, after the shift to the Roman Empire, the first Roman emperor that I mentioned earlier, Augustus, he led the first major reform. He divided the responsibility of public finance. Revenues from state-controlled provinces went to the state treasury, or the aerarium, and revenues from the imperial territories went to the emperor's treasury, or the fiscus. Now, over time, as the influence of the Senate would dwindle down, the aerarium, or the state treasury, would eventually become redundant, and the emperor's treasury, or the fiscus, would end up representing almost all of the public financing. But then a new problem came up. The emperors started to become more powerful, and with this they became even more reckless with public spending. So in the reign of Septimus Severus, the fiscus, or the emperor's treasury itself, was divided into two. The first for government revenue, and the second for the emperor's own fortune. Now, despite all of this, the empire still struggled with revenue generation, and this was a constant theme during the empire's lifespan. So the question is, how did Roman emperors even make money? You see, the Roman system of revenue collection was rather crude. The central administration would issue tax demands to their various settlements, and these local settlements would then decide by themselves on how to raise those taxes. There was no central system of governance of any sort. So this inefficient system was finally revamped under the reign of the Emperor Diocletian, who crafted a system that sort of resembles the modern tax system. So this reform actually centralized financial control, with the imperial government dictating and standardizing the entire process all the way down to the civic level. And this system really helped with making the entire process more efficient and therefore bringing in more revenue for the empire. However, by Diocletian's time, the empire had already been in a state of decline, and his various reforms came a bit too late, and it didn't really help to save the prosperous western half from eventually collapsing. In many ways, the modern world has actually built its foundation based on these Roman institutions. In both Europe and in the Middle East, many Roman laws and institutions would survive in some way, shape, or form, and these would be further expanded. These would be further exported to the rest of the world as well, through cultural influences or even through colonization. So looking back at how money worked in the Roman times, in the Roman Empire, from daily life to banking, all the way to which the empire was run, all of this stuff gives us a peek into how those early decisions and policies helped shape our view of the world of finance as we know it today. If you enjoyed this video, consider checking out this video about bankruptcy that I made about medieval times. Subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.